Of the leading house and others. Good morning overseas in Latin America. We all give you a warm welcome to this second workshop in a series searching for ways of coping with the paradigm shift in empirical research and field work methods. As traveling and face-to-face is not a given anymore, this is mostly in a remote mode. For several months, the virus has kept researchers paralyzed and stuck due to travel restrictions and other COVID measures. We have to find a way out of this. Virtual tools necessary to cope with the pandemic will continue to shape our work on a long-term basis. Also, funding institutions, I think, have to show utmost flexibility following this paradigm shift in the fieldwork. So, dear researchers, thank you for your interest and participation today. We will record this event for people who cannot attend today. If you do not wish to appear in the recording, please have your camera turned off all moment, else we would be very happy to see you. And the recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. The link will be in the chat. I would like to thank our team hosting this event, Leticia Vargas-Bento, who organized it and will moderate Natalia Reinoso's presentation. Rocio Robinson will moderate the presentation of the 4 cases and your comments and questions perhaps in the chat. Please feel free anytime to use the function. We have received insights during our first workshop and have learned about different methods with which we might support and ease our remote research, providing methodological alternatives and tools. A very interesting field, it seems to me, much remains to be discovered and tested. So during the introductory workshop, I was impressed, for instance, by William Gaver's cultural probes as an antidote to the current digitalization processes of research. So he was sending his packages to the participants of his research to provide them a haptic, analog, creative experience of sharing information. And this package contained, sent by post, by snail mail, contained like disposable camera, notebooks, writing facilities, etc., so that the participants could sort of auto present themselves and regarding the questions which were at stake. So that was interesting. And Helen Cara showed us a global panorama of adapted research methods in COVID. So today we will move on, and we will move from this general introduction to concrete practical cases and possible solutions of researchers having had to adapt their fieldwork to remote. Again, we have 2 experts with us who will give our 4 leading house researchers some feedback in the second part of today's meeting. First, Natalia Reinoso from Colombia and Elizabeth Hidson from UK will give us some inputs, share their insights. Dr. Elizabeth Hidson is a senior lecturer in education at the University of Sunderland, Northeastern England. She finished her Ph.D. at Durham in 2018. Her thesis is about teachers' transitional knowledge and pedagogical practices in a new computing curriculum. She used digital and video-based methods to capture and explore teachers' planning processes. Elizabeth has great expertise in distance learning, which is why currently she's quite busy. Among her EdTech research projects are video-enhanced lesson observation for teacher education, then the creative use of mobile technologies for teacher education, self-organized learning and multimedia apps, technology-enhanced learning and digital pedagogies, ICT and computing education, and the use of digital and visual research methods. In fact, she has given talks all along 2020, for instance, at her own University of Sunderland's Global Forum. Her title was Teaching Online, the COVID-19 Catalyst for Change. Thus, as we all know, it is not only about remote research, but it's also about remote teaching. This is one of the reasons why Elizabeth is today with us. We have invited her and are now looking forward to her presentation. Dear Elizabeth, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. The screen is all yours.
Lovely, thank you very much. I will just check that I can share. Zoom is telling me that the host disabled participant screen sharing. So if you could press the appropriate buttons at your end.
It's done already. It's done already. Yeah, you can.
Okay. One of the things I have heard about Zoom is it allows you to have PowerPoint as a virtual background. So I have never used this. So I'm going to take the risk today and click on PowerPoint as a virtual background.
We have to experiment.
Oh, apparently I need a plug-in. If we can wait 2 seconds while this works to see if this. I'm so I saw it working very effectively in a recent presentation. And if it's at all possible, now obviously I don't know what I will see. Do you see?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So PowerPoint and share and desktop and my presentation.
Now it's coming. Yeah,
oh,
great.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, we see you. Wow, that's impressive.
There you go. I've always wanted to do that.
Wow. Impressed. Okay, so now it's.
Thank you. And thank you very much for that really interesting presentation of me as a speaker and why you would have me involved in your event. Because I think one of the most exciting things that has come from the move to the global research community that we are now experiencing is being able to reach people who you would formerly not necessarily have thought about speaking with or sharing ideas with. And I truly believe that this is one area of research that we need to continue once things are more back to normal, once we are able to do the things we used to do, that we don't forget about the opportunities that the pandemic has brought and the way that it has enabled us to share as a research community. And that's certainly something that I will talk about a little bit in today's presentation. I suppose my interest in education is going to come through quite strongly. And I thought about this. I thought, having spoken to Leticia and Yvette, about whether I was really the right kind of person to be speaking with you. But actually, I think the sharing of interdisciplinary ideas is important because at the end of the day, we are all researchers, all seeking to answer our questions in only a limited number of ways. And it's really our creativity and the way that we approach those questions that marks us out into disciplinary fields. So perhaps we're looking more at what makes us similar than what makes us different. But hearing of other people's insights and perspectives, I think, will only help. And I obviously will not be an expert on some of the things that you will share with me today, but I will try and give an outsider and interested critical friend perspective as we go through. And I would hope that you will take my presentation in that sort of vein today. So I am really interested in the opportunity to do things a little bit differently. I have a very particular kind of methodological background that I'm going to talk to you about, and my education work I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with you how students of mine are coping with the change. So how schooling is no longer schooling if perhaps the school and the staff and the students are all offline or hybrid or online, working in different ways. And I think that's quite important. I'm also going to share some tools to think with, things particularly from a social science or education arena, that may just help you to think about things a little bit differently, or just to bring some ideas to the fore that may not have been expressed in quite the same way. I hope that my speaking voice isn't too fast. I appreciate that I'm more used to sort of working predominantly with solely English language background people from my UK work, but I've also traveled and presented internationally. So I have tended to find that if I slow down a little and I try not to use any uniquely English phrases, then usually people can understand me fairly clearly. But if I'm unclear, please do put something in the chat, and I will endeavour to resolve that as quickly as I can. So this is where I'm based, at the University of Sunderland, which is it presents itself as a professions-facing university. It's very interested in theory into practice, and all of our areas of research are really around the sort of the practitioner basis, the sorts of professions that people would be working in, and how best to share learning in that sense. But also I work on an island, which is off the coast of mainland Europe, and very distant from a lot of the places where you might want to carry out research. So I have been all over Europe and Asia, and found ways to get out there when the world is in a more normal place. But I have always found that no matter what, it has been useful to be able to reach people remotely, as have you. And I think that's really one of the things that shapes the way you think. What is actually at your fingertips to be able to do in terms of your work and your research. So a lot of the projects that I've worked on in international areas have demanded and depended upon being able to access them remotely. And so I'll share a little bit of that today. My background is as a senior lecturer in education. I look after teacher training and teacher education right up now to supervising doctorates. People who are mostly interested in pedagogical research, but also all of our trainees, our teachers in training, will have different disciplinary interests, and they will bring their interest in biology or chemistry or dance or art or English literature to their research in education studies. So necessarily education has to be flexible in terms of taking other disciplines into the kind of educational fold and helping them to carry out useful and valuable research in their time with us. I have to say it is really quite odd to see the slides and myself on the screen, but I'm liking it. I think that this is the new way forward for me. I'm going to get a Zoom license.
We're impressed, and you should tell us in the end how to do it.
Yeah. Lovely. I will try. One of the other things that I am very proud of is my involvement in an organization called the Technology, Pedagogy and Education Association. I'm a committee member, and we have a journal called Technology, Pedagogy and Education. And we have always looked at the ways that educational technology should support and service education as an area. And you might think that that makes the people in my kind of organization 100% committed to education, to technology every single time. But actually, one of the things I'll share with you today is that we are very much about pedagogy before technology, the thinking about when and when not to use technology, and that will shape some of the things that I talked to you about as well. So in terms of research, the sorts of things I've been involved with, as Yvette alluded to, video enhanced observation. We've worked in a 5-6 country partnership to look at using video enhanced observation, where we were not able to go into classrooms, but the teacher would be there with a video and be able to record their lesson, and we would look at that in terms of research data. So, and that can be used very much in terms of a quantitative approach, counting of things that are happening, or a qualitative approach in terms of what sort of thinking frameworks can we apply, what kind of pedagogy is working in the classrooms. In terms of the Eurosol project, we looked at self-organized learning, which is literally putting computers into spaces for children to use, with just a guide on the side and not being taught in any particular way. So how children can learn to use technology driven by their own research questions and interests. Fascinating material. And as well as that, multimedia apps for language learning, multimedia apps for teacher education, where they take control of their own professional development by trying out lots of different things. And I've worked across most of the universities in the Northeast. There are only 5 universities in the Northeast of England, and I've worked at 3 of them. So the northeast of England seems like a very vibrant place for educational technology, I must say. But about a year ago, as things were shutting down and we were experiencing this unprecedented change to all of our lives, I noticed on Twitter one day, Deborah Lupton calling out for ideas about what can we do in this time. And that was early, the date there, March 16th. Some places had only just gone into lockdown. Because I work a lot with international trainees, our trainees in Hong Kong had already been shut down and away from school for a while by that point, and the rest of the world was beginning to catch up. And I was very interested in this because some of my background and the way that I've used technology has really encouraged me to embrace digital and visual research methods at a time when perhaps others would not have seen them as the most appropriate ways to do research. And I very much found that I was alone at times in my fascination with these areas, at that time studying at a very traditional university like Durham, where there was a very structured way of approaching research, and my ideas were a little bit kind of outside the norm. So I contributed to this crowdsourced document, which interestingly has gained an awful lot of attention internationally. When I looked on it the other day, I think possibly I took this screenshot yesterday or the day before, there were 12 people looking at this crowdsourced document to see what other people were saying about research in a pandemic. And Deborah closed the document, I suppose, because it started to grow quite large, but the different kinds of materials that were there, everything from photo elicitation, diaries, wearable cameras, different ways to approach interviews or different ways to think about observations. And my small contribution was to share at that time the fact that I had been using internet video calling and desktop sharing as a discrete research method in my own doctoral studies, as well as sort of through the research I was doing. And that's very much kind of what I'm going to allude to slightly today, but not in an awful amount of depth, because I think once I've told you what it is, you'll see the relevance, and then I'll move on to some other things. But really, I want to take a moment to step back into what in my field of work we would call the beginnings of a community of practice. You may have come across Wenger and the idea of communities of practice, but really it's about people getting together with similar interests or a passion for something to share the way that they do things, to create a new kind of environment for what we're doing. And it seems to me that we are now researchers in the time of COVID. My teachers are trainee teachers in the time of COVID. We are all researchers in the time of COVID, and we can't allow that to be a barrier. We can only see that as an opportunity to learn from each other. And so perhaps where we might have turned to our professors and our mentors and our supervisors and our colleagues for ideas, now the time has come that we have to reach out globally and find who is doing something interesting, yes, in our field, but also perhaps not in our field, but where the methodology can be drawn upon. And one of the things that I talk to my supervisees about is, when you do your reading around your literature review, what methodological knowledge can you gain from that? How does that impact not just your approach, but also your thinking about how best to do things in your field? And I kind of wanted to put that there as really one of the reasons why I felt comfortable in speaking with you today, because I think bringing that extra idea of a community of practice into our discussions this afternoon will help us to sort of learn and share from each other, and not see it as being so very, very different, but that we are all researchers in this new kind of community of practice. Now, as I said, when I was doing my own doctoral research, I felt very much at times alone in my work. And I read a piece of work by Susie Weller, who was looking at using Skype at that time for qualitative interviews. And she described it as a methodological frontier. And I have to say, it did very, very much feel like that around the time of 2015, 2016, 2017, and even up until this last year, it has felt like a very lonely place to be at the frontier, because you don't find many people at frontiers. You tend to be alone or with a very few people. But that has changed so rapidly in the last year that one of the reasons I contributed to Deborah Lupton's work was to share that it isn't just in the time of COVID that these things are happening. It's just that it will have been smaller and less well known before the recent interest. And so the work that I mentioned, I was at that point writing into an article, and the article has since been published, specifically around internet video calling and desktop sharing as an emerging research method. in my case, for exploring pedagogical reasoning in lesson planning. But the reason that I think that's important is because although people were using the tools, they weren't at that time seeing it as a research method, merely a function of their computer. And I think the time has come for us to look at the way that we use research methods in a more deliberate and conscious way. And that, I think, is kind of going to underpin the way that we work through. So when I was doing this study, I was looking at how teachers were planning their lessons at a time of curriculum change. One day they were teaching one thing, come the next school year, they were teaching something different. They didn't have time to upskill and get a new degree in between the two things happening. So I was really curious to find out how that was actually working, how they were able to teach this new subject to them in such a short space of time. And I realized that data collection was going to be difficult because I wanted to get inside their head, really. I wanted to know what they were thinking when they were doing their work, how they were planning their work, where they were finding resources and materials to help them. But it's impossible to sit inside somebody's head, as we all know. It's always going to be finding a method that works as a proxy for what you want to see. If you think back to your ideas around conceptualization and operationalization in research, you know, how do we actually measure that we want to measure? How do we know that is the thing that we're looking for? And so I tried some face-to-face interviews, I tried some online interviews, and I found that the online interviews, because I was able to record what was going on, step back from the video and really become immersed in a kind of a visual ethnography, I could learn and see so much of what these teachers were doing, thinking, saying, where they were looking, how they were making the links between different materials and methods and curriculum requirements to be able to teach, even though they lacked confidence and experience in what they were teaching. And I think that's really quite important because I learned something about myself as a researcher and about research while I was doing this, that there wasn't always just one way to do things. And I think some of the relevant takeaways from that piece of work really were around what I thought I was going to be doing, which was video stimulated interviews. I thought I will ask them to get video, I will look at the video and we will talk about it. In reality, the process of research turned into a think aloud process in some cases, where the way that teachers were comfortable to talk to me about what they were doing elicited a whole wealth of new data that I hadn't even realized, but opened up many more avenues for research and thinking, 2 or 3 PhDs worth, not just one. And I took that to be a real benefit of the research process. And so now it might seem that yes, video sharing and video calling and desktop sharing is a fairly straightforward thing, but at the time I had to kind of present this to my supervisors and say, this is what I'm doing, because it wasn't being done where I was working. And so you can see on the screen there that I've got the idea of the researcher, we've got the participant with their desktop, the participant, we've got the think aloud strands where they're talking, the dialogue where we're creating new data by dint of discussing what was going on. And that's not just an idea of dialogue as, oh, we're just going to have a formal chat, a conversation. If you think about dialogic approaches, something that is created in the dialogic space is new and interesting. It wasn't there before. And so starting to theorize some of these practices was a new angle on what I was able to achieve in this sort of work. So from that, some of the things that I've taken from research using video calling and desktop sharing, research questions, problems and challenges provided the stimulus for the methods to capture the practices in an authentic manner. And I think that authenticity in research for all of us, no matter what discipline, is going to be really key. And today particularly, I think is going to be very interesting as the researchers share what they're doing. But I think also we have a requirement to think about our methodological heritage. We can't just select things from a menu. There has to be a bit more thought that goes into it. And so from my perspective, beginning with an interest in visual methods led to a visual ethnography, then to video methods, and then through that to embracing recall, reflection, and dialogue as part of the research process, which became possible through internet video calling and desktop sharing. And so the methodological heritage channels all of that through into a discrete research method that I was able to argue found provided me with the opportunities to answer my research questions. And I would put that out there as something really key to be thinking about today. But also the surprising and enabling effect of doing research differently. I expected my research to go one way, it didn't. I had to change, adapt, as we all do in the real world of research, to the way that the participants responded to that, to what was possible with the technology and what was appropriate in terms of asking the sorts of questions that I needed the answers to. And I suppose the conclusion there is that it can be done differently and perhaps better. And online research in its own right, depending on the nature of the research, may be more suitable than something that you had thought of before. But I will also challenge myself and say, and maybe not, because I'm not going to stand there as somebody who will say it's always the best way. I don't believe that. And as we move through, you'll see why I don't believe that necessarily in every case. So I'm a teacher educator, and education in a pandemic internationally is very different to the way that it usually is. I work on an international distance learning teacher education program. We work with about 700 or 800 students a year in international schools all over the world, just about everywhere I can think of, including South America, including Switzerland, and anywhere else in between. And so depending on whether you are in the more digitally switched on parts of the world, where if I move my head out of the way, you can see parts of the Middle East, which have moved completely to online learning, are very happy. We've also got North America and other areas of the world that are very switched on and have their teaching entirely by Zoom or some other branded method. We have hybrid learning, particularly this picture at the top right-hand side is from a school in Hong Kong, where that's a PE lesson being undertaken in socially distant requirements. So if you can imagine the challenges of trying to adapt teaching to that. And then parts of this particular school at the bottom in Zimbabwe, where very little had practically changed and they didn't have the same sorts of infrastructure for online learning. So these are my postgraduate teacher trainees who are also, apart from learning to teach, learning to become research-informed practitioners by carrying out their own research. And that's one of the things that I've been talking quite a lot about, because the world is very interested in how you move education online and how you research online. And one of my approaches to that is to talk to the trainees, they may be postgraduate, but to me they're still trainees, about research is always messy. And this diagram was on Twitter some time ago about not blocking the path of inquiry. Yes, things may be difficult, but you can find ways around it. And we've talked to them about needing their research tools, and their research tools will of course come from the research questions they're trying to ask, which is part of our work in supporting them. And what we ask them to do is to tell an academic story. And no matter what the academic question might be, or what the method they might use to do that, it's all part of that ongoing narrative that we're trying to explore. They have a question, they have to answer it in the same way that every other researcher has to do. These students are working at level 7, so just under, these are master's degree level students. Some of them may come with other experiences. And we want them to be able to embrace the context that they find themselves in, choose the right kinds of approaches to answering the question, think about the right kind of research methods, being able to capture that, analyze that, explore it, discuss it, relate it to literature, and come up with unique findings in their schools. And I think that's the same no matter what level you're working at, whether you're a master's degree student changing your teaching in a pandemic, or whether you're a researcher who has been blocked from getting their fieldwork done. We all have to try and still tell the academic story. We can't stop just because things are more difficult. We need to remember that it is about trying to get around the island of research, if you like. And one of the things that's been other people have been quite interested in is how we have managed to, as a distance learning program, teach online research methods with asynchronous international distance learning students. So we did a piece for the Social Research Methodology journal recently to talk about how we were doing that. And actually, one of the ways we did that was, you can just see me in the bottom. I'm quite liking this Zoom thing. Bringing together our students into a community of practice. I called it the case study coffee shop, so that they could actually talk about the complexities, and I could share with them that they are researchers struggling like other researchers in this time, which is why, again, I felt comfortable to come and talk to you about these experiences, because we are the same. We are experiencing frustrations and difficulties in this time in our quest for knowledge, really. And I will just bring you back to a few interdisciplinary things, tools to think with. One of the things that I have discovered through my research is that it is possible to learn a lot from what other people do. In education, we might call that formally metacognition, thinking about thinking, learning about learning. That you can gain insight into the way that other people do things by looking at their materials, looking at their ideas, listening to the way that they share things. And I have written about that as pedagogy by proxy. And in thinking about what to say to you today, I thought about that in terms of research. And I think maybe by presenting that very practical example, if I buy a teaching resource, I take on board what that teacher has thought about in terms of the way that they believe teaching and learning should happen, how they would go about it, and how the students would interact with that. If we as researchers share our research ideas, we are doing a very similar thing. It is perhaps a chance to rethink what methodology and methods tell us about researcher positionality, ontology, epistemology, how we see and understand research in our own fields, and how we can perhaps break out of narrower ways of thinking and embrace the way that other people would do things. So examining our own beliefs in order to make sure that we are using the best tools for the sort of work that we need to do. And going further back into my field of technology, and I did say that I wasn't going to say technology is the best thing and you should absolutely use it. There's been an entire part of computing called unplugged computing. Harking back to the earlier days when it was about when and when not to use technology, and that it must be a deliberate and justified choice. And as a teacher educator with an educational technology background, I would always say it has to be the pedagogy before the technology. And that gives me an insight into research methods, that the research question must come before the methodology and the methods, and that they need to make just as much sense in terms of why you would do something. So some of the examples on the screen there, you know, how do you teach computing and computer science without a computer? Is it possible? Yes, it is possible, because the concepts, the abstract ideas, the things that make computing what it is, do not rely on having your fingers on a keyboard to be able to teach them. So, for example, the teaching spreadsheets through dance, iteration, recursion, different sorts of ideas that are repeated in algorithms can be done physically with your body. That teaching somebody binary numbers or how to do a searching algorithm or how to design a network doesn't have to be done on a computer. And so bringing that into where we are today is how else can you approach research when perhaps your fallback of the traditional methods you would use are blocked for you. I will give you a tool to think with. I appreciate I'm almost at the end, so don't panic, I'm nearly there. But one of the, this is more of a taxonomy. Education likes things that make sense in a practical, pragmatic way. And one of the things I like about this model is that it looks at the way that we use technology, either as a direct substitute, and therefore the technology doesn't really make a difference. You could have done it any other way. It just happened to be that you're doing it with the technology. Or that perhaps, does technology have some sort of improvement on what was there already? Is the technology able to augment what you're doing? Or does it require or enable a significant task redesign? And that's the modification of this particular approach. Or is it the case that you end up absolutely redefining the way that you would have done things, and that technology allows you to do something that you could not have previously done or not previously done in that way? And I think as a tool to think with, having some language to try and get yourself to play with the ideas in your research, even if it's something borrowed from another field, even if it's something as little as a thinking taxonomy, just may enable you to unblock some of the thought processes. So if you experience a bit of writerly or research block, that perhaps thinking about things differently would just be the thing that helps you to kind of move on. And of course, as we are in a community of practice, there are far, far more experienced people than me in this area. The National Centre for Research Methods in the UK is doing fantastic work on social science in the context of COVID-19. There are all sorts of guides there, wayfinder guides to adapting interview practices, working with different sorts of lower middle income countries, doing ethnography, doing sensory methods differently. I would absolutely direct you to have a look at that, because that's a live research project at the moment. Usually they look at teaching research methods, and so the pedagogy of teaching research methods. But some of this stuff is so current and so exciting that I can't help but direct you to it. From that has also been born a series of people willing to share and talk about their work. So the Breaking Methods webinar series, all sorts of new ideas out there that you may not have thought about, or may just have an interest in exploring before you make your concrete ideas about how you're going to change your research. So in summary, bringing all of those ideas back together and sort of say to you why I would be talking to you and what I think I have just shared with you. Computing, education, and social science research, different disciplines to your own perhaps, yes, but similar issues, all needing some kind of rethink in the COVID-19 era. I will push you back to the thinking about IT capability, that idea of when and when not to use technology, unplugged versus the online or remote, as a deliberate and justified choice. And of course, pushing you back to your ontology, epistemology, your thought processes around that. And sort of summarizing that as pedagogy before technology and tools in education, but research questions before methodology and methods, so that you're sure that the choices that you're making fit with your overall ideas for research and the sorts of questions you want answering. And that actually what we are engaging in today and benefiting from is this new idea of learning from others and micro-learning, communities of practice, such as Lupton's work and exactly what we're doing here today. And that's it. I'm probably a few minutes over, but I thought I'd take the opportunity as being the first speaker to just throw out some ideas that maybe will help us to think with as we move forward. And I will stop sharing. And thank you. If there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So you gave us some important input. I mean, it's clear that you have been working on this remote access since a long time, and that now it's really booming. So this is really, yeah, it's impressive. And that's why it got to this metacognition level and rethinking and redefining the methods. And it's interesting that this National Center for Research Methods in UK, we will of course access to it and see how it adapts. So I'm sure there will be question. I have perhaps the first one, a practical one, because you made me think when you talked about the micro learning, we also can talk about the micro researching. So my question to you would be, how exactly in practice do you do video enhanced observation? So how does it exactly look like? Do you do coding when you see the filming? And I mean, it also, I already said it in a former workshop, it reminds me a little bit of Jessica Mesman. She's at the University of Maastricht, of Jessica Mesman's video reflexive method, which registers aspects on a very micro level. So she observes people in the field, above all in stressful situations, for instance, in hospitals. And then she does the auto analysis of the people filmed who look at the footage. And then she talks very, very like discreetly with them and lets them talk, and then they really get on a micro level. So my question to you would be, if you observe the teachers, how do you do exactly this video enhanced observation?
One of the projects I worked on was the VO Europa project, where we had a number of different countries, Finland, Spain, Germany, UK, Ireland was partly involved. And so for that particular project, we were working with a spin-off part of the University of Newcastle, where they had developed an iPad app that was able to layer a framework on top of what you were seeing as you were observing. So the idea would be, and I don't happen to have an iPad handy, but let's imagine that my diary is an iPad. So you would set up the video, the iPad to take the video using a clamp or a tripod or sometimes handheld. And then as you are observing the lesson, you have the framework. Now, what we would have been using would have been a customized framework for looking for pedagogical sort of signposts. So we would be looking for teacher talk, rapport, questioning, that sort of thing. And either you can take a very quantitative approach and you can quantify the number of times something is happening, because that's relevant. If you're trying to look at a teacher and support them with the amount of teacher talk, for example, that they perhaps needed to reduce the amount of teacher talk by using the system to timestamp when you were seeing instances of something happening, you could convert that into a quantitative summary. Alternatively, you can use the timestamping function of that particular app for other things that you might see. For example, when a teacher might use body language to indicate to a student that their behavior is unwelcome. And one of the examples I always use is one where a teacher looked at a student like this, and the student started to tuck their shirt in because it was a uniformed school, and to have the shirt loose was to be in infringement of the school rules. But the teacher didn't say anything, they just looked, and the student knew. So unpicking the body language, the expectations there, it creates that space for dialogue. So every time a teacher would be having a lesson observation, there would be a reason for that observation, either generally how they're working towards the teaching standards that they're trying to work to, or specifically in trying to improve practice. So depending on whether you want to take a quantitative or a qualitative approach to that, whether you want to do inductive or deductive approaches to research, the technology is a tool to support the purpose of the observation, the research question, if you like. And I think that's why I'm so open to the idea that pedagogy before technology and methodology before, or research questions before methodology, because to me, it makes utmost sense in my field where education and technology have come together quite a lot.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So it's really about, I mean, also for the future when the pandemic will be less hitting less, it's about dose and overdose. We're moving between dose and overdose, right dose and overdose of digital
but also
technology.
Some things that need to stay. My team at the University of Sunderland, we recently were awarded the Vice Chancellor's Fellowship for Teaching Innovation, because a research project that we're doing is around video enhanced dialogic assessment. So if you imagine it in research terms as being a bit like a viva, the oral examination of the trainee teacher's portfolio, and that could be their lesson videos, and it can be the documents that they've created, the teaching resources, everything pulled together in a digital portfolio. And then we will have an online viva with them and use prompts to try and check the knowledge and understanding, as you would in a viva situation, but specifically around the teacher standards. And in the UK, we have a series of teacher standards that all qualified teachers must meet. And so it's a very explicit framework for thinking. But in that space, we were able to theorize, and that's why I'm so happy with the idea of the dialogic approach, theorizing what is happening in that dialogic space. That if it's there, then it will, if the knowledge and understanding is there in the trainee, then it will come to the fore in that dialogic space. If it isn't, then even the best questions of the assessor is not going to be able to pull out something that isn't there. And so for something that's relatively high stakes in terms of assessment, either pass or not pass, it is still possible to generate new evidence at the time of the assessment that may be the thing that tips the balance into being convincing the assessor that the trainee has met the standards, which is very much the same as the way that the viva approach, the oral exam, works in postgraduate research. And so therefore, it makes sense to look at what works well in that situation and see if we can learn across phases, because it isn't usual to take the way that we would assess doctoral trainees and begin to assess teacher training or indeed anything else. But it's quite exciting and something that demands, requires, expects that we will continue to work in that way. On a distance learning program, we will continue to work in that way, because with the best will in the world, me and my team are not going to visit 800 students in international schools, you know, in an easy way. So there has to be an element that some of these methods will remain because they are the most suitable methods for what we're trying to achieve. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Is there any question? I don't see any in the chat, I think. But is there any question, spontaneous one? Just speak up. Whoever has a question for Elizabeth.
I have a question.
Please.
So my name is Betty Benrey. You don't see that in the screen because I'm using a computer that it's not mine, and I haven't been managed to change the name. So if anyone has advice on how to do that. Very interesting, Elizabeth. It's definitely, you have tons of information that could be useful for all of us. And it's very impressive, all the solutions and all the, the ideas you propose. And it looks, you've said it, that you've been doing this for a while. Do you have any information on the other side? I mean, not the teaching, but the learning and the performance of students with these methods compared to the conventional methods?
Interestingly, we ask, because we work with our students on live projects all the time. They are doing their live projects in their schools and we act as supervisors for those projects. Not all of our students have needed to, but a large majority of our students, I would say probably 60–70% have needed to move to either a hybrid approach where they were able to gather some data and then they needed to fill in the rest with their with ideas from the literature, or completely changing their methods so that they were able to answer the question somehow. So obviously I come from an education background, and what they are able to do in relation to education and schooling is going to be related to observing lessons, gathering data, documents, interviews, observations, assessments, that sort of thing. So whilst they may need to take a different approach, they're not going to be doing anything that is so radically different. It's more of a rethinking of what they can do. So where teaching and learning had moved online, they were able to take video of lessons and analyze what's going on thematically. Whereas perhaps when they were in school, they were able to observe the lesson, but actually have a conversation with the teacher at the end, and that builds up their knowledge. So I don't think that the challenge to my teacher trainees is the same as the challenge to people like yourselves who will be out in the field and trying to change the way that you're doing your research. But the challenge for my trainee teachers is suddenly they have to think on their feet, and the resilience that allows and encourages has been quite impressive. And I would say that having just taken yesterday about 700 students' first assignments to the assessment board, I would say that hasn't damaged the way that they have been able to perform, but it has widened our understanding and appreciation of how flexible not only they would need to be as researchers, but how flexible and creative we would need to be as assessors of that work. And again, I think building all of our capacity for research. So I don't see that it has damaged or reduced the quality of what they have been able to achieve. It looks different because where it has been different is perhaps the confidence that they would have in analyzing their own data and having the confidence in the findings or the conclusions that they feel they have drawn. So because it's very new to them to be looking at online materials or video or beginning to do coding, perhaps thematic coding on the videos that they have seen, that they lack the confidence that their conclusion is valid. And I think there's a lesson to be learned there for more experienced researchers that equally we would have to have confidence that our findings are valid in terms of what we set out to achieve in terms of a research question and approach, if that answers your question.
Yes,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. So now we are slowly running out of time, and I would suggest that you ask your other questions to Elizabeth in our second part, when we will discuss the 4 cases, the concrete cases of leading house researchers. And we thank you very much, Elizabeth, and we're looking forward to your feedback to the cases. And now I would like to hand over. We will move to Latin America, to Colombia, and Leticia will moderate Natalia Reinoso's talk.
Yes, thank you, Yvette. So I'm glad to introduce you Natalia Reinoso. She will present her process of adjustment of research in Colombia. Natalia is a psychologist with a master's degree in education and cultural diversity. She is the intercultural education coordinator in the Intercultural Medical Study Center, Centro de Estudios Médicos Interculturales, where she has been leading participatory community processes for more than 10 years, aiming to promote cultural preservation, nature conservation, and well-being. Natalia is an intercultural and qualitative research consultant, and she works at the University de La Sabana in Colombia. So thank you, Natalia, for your time. The screen is yours.
Muchas gracias, Yvette y Leticia. I'm going to share now my screen. I'm trying to. Okay, it's working, right? So thank you again for inviting me to this space. And thank you, Elizabeth, for your interesting talk. I was surprised that we are in so different contexts. And even though I have a lot of commonalities in what I'm trying to present to you now. We agreed that I'm going to present in English so all of us can understand, but I appreciate your comprehension in my second language. Okay, so I was invited by Yvette and Leticia to share one experience that was published in this book that Helen Cara shared with you previously, right? So maybe you know a little bit about this experience. And I would like to point out what were the learnings that we had in this particular setting, which is a community-based research in Colombian ethnic territories. And even though I am, the context of my research is independent research, even though I am teaching and supervising in the university. So I have a lot of freedom that maybe you don't have right now in your research processes, but I hope this could help you a lot. So first of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the context. Some of you that have been working in Latin America or are Colombians, I believe there are two of you are Colombian, right? You need to understand a little bit about the context we were facing. I was called by an international NGO to make an evaluation of the cultural approach of a psychosocial strategy that is assisting indigenous and Afro-Colombian displaced victims in the Pacific region of Colombia. This region has been longly victim of systematic discrimination and state abandonment, and also is one of the regions most affected by the armed conflict that we have been living. It's the longest armed conflict we have lived, and it hasn't stopped despite the peace the peace agreement we signed recently in 2016. So in this context, this NGO needed to make this evaluation, knowing that they are assisting the 80% of the population they're assisting is Afro-Colombian or indigenous. And they called me in the middle of the COVID pandemic, which has increased the vulnerability of these populations. And also we had international guidelines that that commanded we had to follow the instructions that we could not travel and we could not contact indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities because we put them in danger. And elders and midwives must be protected in this moment. Also, some of the communities have decided to have isolation. They were not receiving any kind of visitors of outlanders. And also the armed conflict has increased because of COVID-19 in our country and in this region particularly. So that is what we were facing. In a very short theoretical context of why we need to make a cultural adjustment in this context is because, well, when we do not address culture in the different health programs that we develop, then we increase racism. It could be personal, institutional, and structural racism, which happens to increase the health inequities that ethnic populations have been living. That means they don't seek help. The adherence is lower, and the results in therapy, for example, are lower. And also because it has been proven that there's a huge gap between Western psychology and non-Western population, not only with ethnic communities, but also in the refugee and migratory context. So shortly, psychology is not working. Our science is not working if we do not have this cultural approach. We need to shift the deficit narrative about diverse populations, all of them, not only ethnic. And we need to understand that culture is a protective factor that we must protect as a goal and as a process. And that is important to understand the methodological decisions we had to make. So the before and after process, what did we have? In the beginning, we were supposed to make a traditional evaluation program that meant we needed to review some documents, to make participant observations on field, and hopefully do some face-to-face interview in the community level, particularly with the direct beneficiaries, right? That meant they had the expectations that I was going to have this expert role in which I was going to know the other culture from our Western perspective in order to achieve the treatment goals of our Western treatment goals, right? So the question I asked to myself with Santiago, which was my student as an assistant researcher, was what is the one thing that I don't want to give up in my research question? And I suppose you are all making those decisions in this moment. What is the one thing? And for me, as a community psychology that has been doing community-based research driven by specific values, it meant that I could not give up on the values of social justice, particularly towards diversity, not only as a goal of my research, but as the value that guides all the process, all the steps in my research process. Okay. Shortly, what that means is that I could not redo the most popular mistake that we Western social scientists have done for centuries, which is that we go and we research the other, whoever the other is, who doesn't know as much as we do, and we know some things about them that are going to be used in our Western solutions, right? And that generally implies that we do not acknowledge or treat as equal the traditional local knowledge and practices, in this case towards healing in mental health culture. I don't know if you're seeing the full screen. You're seeing the full screen, or is it? Yes. Okay. Thank you. So if I wanted the practitioners, the clinicians that are working there in the Pacific region to take into account the local knowledge and practices into the therapy process, for example, I could not do the opposite thing. I could not have this expert role that is going to have some information from them. In order to give my solution, I needed to be accountable with the values I was pursuing, right? And that was the thing that I didn't want to give up on in my research question. That meant that I had to do two major changes in the design process. I was not going to be able to focus on the community level because of COVID, but I could work in the organizational level. And by doing so, I could achieve some of the transformational goals I was trying to achieve in the community level as well. As I wanted to shift from a traditional program evaluation to an approach that could understand that it's better to co-construct knowledge based on the experience, I propose a systematization of experiences methodology, which is a Latin American participatory action research strategy that Jara has widely described, and also Falkenberg and Torres in other contexts. That meant all of us were going to have a collective learning from praxis, okay? So the research question that we were going to answer altogether was, what are the collective learnings about the ethnic approach in the psychosocial displaced victim assistance strategy? We needed to reconstruct the story of the history of the program. We needed to identify culturally unsafe events and visualize successful cases of cultural approach in order to co-construct the intercultural adjustment for the psychosocial strategy based on the experience of the practitioners, but also of the stakeholders and the beneficiaries. Okay, so now the methodology. As I told you before, we were going to focus on the team, on the organizational level. So in the middle of this solar system, we were working very closely with the national program director and also with the team in the 5 different regionals of the program, 5 different offices around the Pacific region. And it was the practitioners who were the ones as co-researchers that were able to approach to displaced or confined beneficiaries and also to stakeholders in the government organization and also in the social organization that, for example, the CRIC, el Consejo Regional Indígena del Cauca, which is a very known indigenous organization that was key for us to understand what they needed to be changed. And also Chiyangwa, which is an organization that has been working with Afro midwives for decades. Okay, so the step-by-step process is here, which I believe can be useful for you. Do you see the, yes, here, there, too big. Okay. We started with an introductory online focus group, and this focus group was very important in order to achieve the team building strategy we needed in a participatory approach. So we built a safe space for participation. We use Teams and we also use Mentimeter. I believe some of you have known it, in order to increase participations in the focus group, because it is very difficult to change this approach of the expert role. I was the one with the answers, but I didn't want to be the one with the answers. They were the ones with the answers. And when they felt that my role was going to be to highlight their good role, their knowledge, their practices, the things that they have already known about doing intercultural approach, then we all felt safe. And they were willing to participate very much. And they helped me with the design of the methodology. It was them who guided the process. They told me who could I achieve via WhatsApp, because many actors don't have electricity or don't have the technology, don't have smartphones or internet, right? So they were the ones to tell me how we could achieve the community level. And I trained them after this focus group in methodological strategies like the most significant change, in order to them to do the fieldwork. I believe some of you are already doing that with students. I'm doing this in the community level, and you're doing this in the academic level, I believe so. And they understood very quickly that they were going to be treated as experts and as allies in our research process. Then we did online interviews where we co-constructed timelines using Google Sheets. And we also did telephonic interviews via WhatsApp mostly with local agents and leaders. And when we couldn't have these technologies, then we did face-to-face interviews to make the most significant change strategy. But it was developed by the practitioners, by the psychosocial professionals that were already trained by us. In some cases, we had to do this mixed scenario. That means they were in their office. Some of the indigenous and Afro-Colombian victims were at the office receiving this assistance. And I was remotely giving some advices to the professionals to implement the most significant change strategy. And I was even able to chat with some of the beneficiaries, but they were on the first line, so to speak. Okay. So with this strategy, we were able to build virtual scenarios that gather multiple actors, and we also achieve capacity building in the organization and sometimes in the community. Then we did a final online discussion group in which we must present our results. We did a thematic analysis of all this information, and we reconstruct the critical cases, the ones that had unsafe cultural interventions, and also the exemplar experiences. Those cases, we presented them, and we also presented the results of the thematic analysis, and they helped us to see some things that we had missed. And then finally, we had an international workshop in which all of us could share the key results, and we invited the indigenous leaders and the Afro-Colombian leaders so they could speak for themselves in this scenario and ask what they needed to be adjusted in the victim assistance process. Okay. So the limitations we had, of course we did, was that we weren't able to achieve representations of elders and midwives because they don't have the technology for that. And we didn't use indigenous methodologies, which not only limits their participations, but also our understandings. There are some informations that can only be transmitted in indigenous and local methodologies. And the third one is that we didn't have a communitarian informed consent, which is very important working with communities that identify themselves as collectives, individuals. And the opportunities that we pointed out in this study and in the chapter that you can find in Helen Cara's book are that we found out that the online methods were not only possible, but very useful during lockdown. You know, most researchers, community-based researchers, are giving up on the participatory characteristic of their research because they think they cannot achieve participation in online settings. But we do. And not only we do, but we can even, as Elizabeth was saying before, we can even do it better. This was a research that was done in 3 months, and I could not possibly done it if I would have to travel, because it was so easy to meet all of us together and to think together. But also because when we are doing these online methods and these encounters like this one, we can experience like being on field. I was at the home of these women that are attending other victim women, and we could easily build rapport by chatting about my kids and the lockdown and how we are all being affected in some similar ways. And they were at their home. I could see all the daily interactions they have and how they manage to give assistance even though the war context and the COVID situation. We were able to build a research team, and I think that was the key of the successful experience, with local agents as experts. And lastly, that helped us to develop local capabilities and autonomy. And I think we can achieve that not only in the community settings, but in organizational levels, and also as some of you are doing in academy, right? If you have graduate students in Mexico, I believe one of the students is doing that, you are developing capabilities also there while you're doing your research team. So thank you. That was what I wanted to share. I hope I was clear enough in my second language.
Thank you very much, Natalia. I just saw here that we have one question, and for us to stick to the agenda, we are going to go with just this one question, and afterwards, during our debate, you can send more questions to Natalia. So the question is from Patricia, and she said that it was very interesting research. How did you handle data protection, especially because you were collecting data with survivors of the armed conflict? Especially because you used WhatsApp and Google as tools.
Yes. So what we did was, well, we had this drive, for example, this, there were 2 moments of sensitive information gathering. One of them was the story reconstruction that we did in Google. So we had to do it. The practitioners knew that that was the context and that we had to put down the data as fast as we could. We needed the space for interaction, but then we downloaded and protected it. Also, they were speaking about particular cases and communities, but not about the armed groups that were involved in the process. They spoke about their work with the victims, but not about the actors. They are very trained on that. We also had to be sure that to tell them that we were going to have these interviews via WhatsApp or telephone, and they had to have a safe environment, because that is actually the real threat there. If somebody listens to them, they're already military targets, right? So they needed to go to a safe place and have a good network, protected network to connect with us. Yes, and in the story, this one was the most difficult, because they could share the story of the most significant change, and sometimes that implied that they were going to speak about the hechos victimizantes. I don't know how to say that in English. The facts, the actual, they needed to talk about who hurt them, right? And how. Sometimes they decided to do that, but they did it on field, on paper, in a safe setting. But then they had to send them to us so we can have that information. Then that was where it could be dangerous. We did it via the formal mail, not on Google. They did it by formal mail. And that's what we could do about it. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you very much, Patricia and Natalia. We'll move now to the next part of our event with Rocio, and we will have a debate moment, and we can discuss more about the example from Natalia and also the other cases that we are going to present now. Rocio.
Okay, buenos días y buenas tardes a todos y a todas. So welcome everybody. My name is Rocio Robinson and I will be moderating the case presentation session of today's workshop. And probably maybe I'll start off with two very quick public service announcements. So if you want to be added to our mailing list, please send an email to leadinghouse@unisg.ch. And if you want to access the recording of this session, you can visit the Leading House YouTube channel. So the links are at the very top of the thread in the chat. So you can access both the email address and the YouTube channel link. So yes, so now we move on to the case presentation session. And it is my honor to present the four persons that will be following. And we are gonna start off with Professor Dr. Betty Benrey from the University of Neuchâtel. Her project received a seed money grant in 2019 in the field of biology. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. If not, please correct me.
No, it's perfect.
Yeah. And welcome, Professor.
Okay,
Dr. Benrey.
Thank you. I will share the screen and just let me know if you see it. Or, oh, I had it right here, but I don't see my presentation. Perhaps, do you have my presentation right there with you?
Yes, so I think that Leticia can share her screen with us and Leticia can present all the slides for all of the presentations. Just let her know when she can move the slide.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay. So thank you, Leticia. Thank you, Rocio, for the invitation. You can go to the next slide, please. So this is, I will give you some background on our project so you get an idea of you can appreciate the challenges we faced. So this is a Milpa. Many of you are, I'm sure, familiar with this agricultural system. The Milpa is a traditional Mesoamerican agricultural system that has been used for thousands of years in Mesoamerica. From the moment of when these plants, from the time when these plants were domesticated, which are the three main plants that comprise the Milpa, are maize, beans, and squash. And depending on the region, there are some plants that can be part of this system, like chili peppers. So it is considered a highly productive system, and it's known for it, or considered to be to have very low damage from pest insects. And some of the reasons are known, but many of the reasons, specifically the ecological reasons of why this is such a productive system, are still unknown. So each plant here plays a functional role. The maize is usually planted earlier in the season. It grows tall and it provides shade and support for the beans. I cannot point to anything because I don't have the screen with me, but you can see the beans there climbing. These are climbing beans, climbing on the corn. And then the squash that you see here, squash usually grows very large leaves, and they grow horizontally, and they're known to maintain soil humidity. And the next slide, please. And the beans, it's a very interesting plant. It has two specific associations, mutualistic associations, beneficial associations with other organisms. The first one is below ground on the roots. These are what you see, the little balls that you see here are nodules from bacteria that are called rhizobia that tap the nitrogen that is free in the atmosphere. The plants cannot do that. So the bacteria, this rhizobia, will get the nitrogen from the atmosphere and will fix it, and the plant can use it as a natural fertilizer. The other association, there's some, is with ants. Here I'm pointing, this arrow points to very small structures that you can see here zoomed where the ant is. These are called extrafloral nectaries. Many plants have them, many legumes like this one, like the beans have them. And these are called extrafloral nectaries because they produce their structures in the plant that produce nectar outside the flower. And the function of this nectar is to attract insects, like these ants here that are attracted and are feeding on this sugary sucrose. It's basically a candy bar for the ants. And in return, if you can click again, please, Leticia. In return, the ant will defend the plant against other insects. So when an insect that approaches the plant to feed on it, the ant will act as an army and will chase the insect. So we were interested in this project to study how all of these traits from these different plants will benefit each other. So specifically focusing on beans, how these traits of characteristics of the plant will help the companion plants, in this case, the maize and the squash. So if you go to the next slide, please. So the plan was, the original project was, together with Karina Bohe at the National University of Mexico in UNAM, to take a group of students from Mexico and a group of students from where I am based in the University of Neuchâtel, and to go and do some large pilot field study. I've been working for many years in this place. It's in the state of Oaxaca, in Puerto Escondido in Mexico, and I get some land. I have a collaboration agreement with a small university that it's called the Universidad del Mar. So we go there and do our field work. And the idea was to have large plots, very large plots of the Milpa that you see here on the left and the bottom with the 3 plants, and monocultures. A monoculture is a plot with only one plant species. So monocultures on maize, squash, and beans, and these replicated in space so that we could have many samples. And we were gonna sample all of these plants, these plots throughout the whole growing season, which is 4 months from November to end of February. And the idea was to collect data on the diversity of insects and ultimately on the damage that the plants suffer on these different settings, with the expectation, the hypothesis that when plants grow in a Milpa setting, they're less damaged by the insects because of these different plant traits that are beneficial. The next slide, just click. But COVID happened and we couldn't travel to Mexico. And so we found we had to go to plan B. Next slide, please. Which was to do some lab experiments. And this was fine with COVID. And we also, next slide, please. The next slide, yeah. So we also managed to do some field work. So we were not able to work at the UMAR campus at the university because they're also in lockdown. So what we did is we rented some land from a local farmer. Raul Gonzalez is a student, a Mexican student that has been working with us for 3 years as a field assistant in Mexico. So I hired Raul and he's used to the work we do. So he set up some Milpa plots like the one you see here on the right, much smaller than the original plan. And we've been communicating remotely. It was nice also because we could hire some local people to help Raul. You see a very small person on the left of the slide, the picture. That's Alfredo Rojas, which is actually the brother of the farmer. So we've been doing this. The work is still going on. I communicate weekly, sometimes more than once a week with Raul. And hopefully we can get enough information to run a larger season once all this is over. And I'll be happy to answer questions afterwards.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Betty Benrey. We have asked all of our panelists, all of our presenters to try to stick to the 5-minute rule as much as possible. And thank you very much for keeping it concise. Next, we will hear from Dr. Peter Varga. He's from the HES-SO, and the project received a seed money grant in 2019 and in the field of sociology. So Dr. Peter Varga, welcome.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes. And we will start sharing the screen one more time.
Yeah, so I think it should be sharing now. Yes, thank you. Okay, so thank you very much. I will try to respect the 5 minutes because I prepared only one slide. It will be very quick. So quickly, we were planning to do a research on the field of sociology about the Galapagos Islands. I don't know how many of you have been visiting this place. It's a fascinating destination, but of course we all know what's going on in the world as far as tourism numbers are concerned. Concerning the UNWTO, the World Tourism Organization, we have probably 74–75% less international tourist arrivals this year, 2020, and the projections are not very good. So we were just exactly in a field which has been hit extremely hard by the pandemic. So we wanted to understand what's going on in the Galapagos Island from a sociological perspective, because most of the studies in the past were looking for answers to environmental and economic impact on the islands, but very few studies were focusing on the sociological perspective of the tourism dynamics on the Galapagos Islands. So basically we wanted to understand what the tourism numbers will tell us concerning the experience tourists are going to have or tourists had in the past about their visit and after their visit on the Galapagos Islands. Because some studies already indicated that in the last few decades, tourists eventually, of course, they liked and they loved the Galapagos Islands, but the appreciation became a little bit less important because of the number of tourists. Just to give you some hints, in the 1960s, there were, in the beginning when they started tourism in the Galapagos Islands, there were less than 2,000 international tourist arrivals on the islands. And when we speak about, in 2018, we speak about 275,000 people visited the islands, and the projections were even more scary because they said maybe if the trend was supposed to go in the same way as in the past, they were even projecting over 300 or 400 tourist arrivals on the islands in 2023. Of course, the pandemic has changed everything. So our original idea of studying the psychographic carrying capacity of the island, which means how much tourists enjoy the experience and how much they are eventually impacted by the presence of other tourists on the islands, and how much the locals eventually feel that this over-tourism dynamic, which was taking place on the islands, is impacting actually the overall tourism experience on the island. Obviously, the pandemic has changed everything, so there are very few tourists. Just to give you some ideas, in August, when the islands reopened, there were, I think, 460 students. In October, 1,200 tourists who arrived the islands. So basically, there are very few tourists at the moment. Of course, there are more and more people going there, but the numbers are really, really behind. Probably there are 75% less tourists in 2020 than it was in 2019. So the impact is huge, and the impacts are huge. So we had to modify our research, and I try to make it very short now. So our plan methodology, of course, doing some field work on the islands, and interviewing or questioning the tourists about their experience. Particularly, we were planning to do it at the airport after the trip. And of course, talking to locals, what they felt about the over-tourism phenomenon on the islands. We cannot do that anymore because the tourism numbers are really low, and it's difficult to access the island, at least from the outside world. We shifted a little bit our interest on more the socio-cultural impact of the pandemic on the islands. So we try to get the data, which is not easy at the moment, from three major stakeholders. One is the hotel sector, so owners or employees, managers in the hotels. The second stakeholder is the guide and the guides on the islands, who actually are very much impacted as well by the pandemic. And the third stakeholders are the residents. So what we do at the moment, we developed 3 surveys, and we already sent 1 survey to the hotels, but we have some difficulties to get answers because this online survey maybe is not, we will see, but we try to get the answers. And now the next step is probably try to contact them to encourage them to answer, because at the moment we have very few answers. So we try to adopt the research. We will see how far we go. And if it is possible, we would like to do a field research, maybe somewhere in June or July, if travel restrictions are lifted and it's easier to travel for us as well. Did I keep the 5 minutes?
Not only did you keep them, you did a stellar job, because we gained 1 extra minute. So thank you.
I can speak longer if you want.
My first question will be to you. So we're going to come back to you,
okay, thank you.
Dr. Varga. Thank you. So third on our list is Dr. Véronique Michaud from the EPFL, whose project received a seed money grant in 2019 in the field of engineering. Welcome, Dr. Véronique Michaud.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? It's okay? Yeah. So I don't know if you want to share the slides as well, or I can, yeah, thank you. Okay. Thank you. So I will try also to respect the timing. I work in the field of composite materials, so I guess it's a bit different from what you are all doing, and working in the field of sustainable composite materials. And we started this collaboration with colleagues from the Universidad de los Andes in Bogota, Professor Alicia Porras. And we decided to work on a project where we develop novel composite materials that can find usage in many potential applications, but using Colombian agricultural waste. So I don't know if you're familiar with the food crops in Colombia, but there's a lot of cocoa, there are a lot of palm trees and so on. So the idea is to use the shells of this cocoa or the palm trees. There's this Manicaria palm tree, which has interesting properties also for us. Maybe also cashew nut shells and so on, which normally are discarded. And to valorize these with polymers that would be bioepoxy or some kind of other thermoplastic. So polymer, which is also more or less bio-based, and propose application. So the purpose of our work was to really find a collaboration where we, from EPFL, this laboratory for processing of advanced composite, we bring expertise in composite manufacturing by infusion processes and on their characterization. And our colleagues from Uni Andes have a lot of expertise in natural fiber composites already. And in particular, they have the source, of course, of all these Colombian sources that you can find. So the method of research that we had was really basing our seed fund work on the visit of a Colombian researcher for 1 week. Then we were supposed to host also this researcher for 8 weeks in the summer. And then we had a visit of a Swiss researcher that was planned in June. And then we wanted to finalize all this with a nice workshop. And we also wanted then, of course, to have the participation of bachelor and master students. So if you can go to the next slide, I will explain what we did. So, of course, we had some issues because everything was based on traveling, and traveling trips were canceled. So we got an extension until 2021, thank you. But and so the materials research is still ongoing. So in the initial phase, it worked fine because we had the researcher Luis Cruz from Uni Andes visited for 1 week. And if you notice the time, it was just before confinement. So the poor guy was with us in the lab for 1 week working while trying to find out if he will ever be able to go back to Colombia or if he will be stuck forever in Switzerland. We already arranged, like, you can stay at my place, we can do this and that. And but he managed to leave and just catch the latest flights to arrive in Colombia. So we managed to perform some experiments, and he could take some samples back and leave some at EPFL. So we had some initial work that worked. So then what we had to do, of course, I mean, as everybody, we just kept in contact with by email and using Zoom. And then we want to continue to work on each side with bachelor and master students. So we had two. I think it's funny also in our field where it's lots of men. This research is done by two, professors, female professors, and we had a lot of female students. So Maria Alejandra and Maria Camila, they are still working actually on related projects. One was a bachelor, one was a master student, and they work on the cocoa fiber extraction and the fabrication of the mats. We managed to get some resin, this helium, which they had never worked with, sent to Colombia. And they have been starting to work with it. I'm also in contact with the guys from Arkema, the company that produces this resin. They also did some tests for us, which they sent back. So we managed by post and phone and email. And so we had some delays, of course, because everybody had restricted lab access, but it worked. And on the EPFL side, we decided, because we could not really host or travel as planned, to have a master semester student, Marion, working on Swiss agricultural waste fibers. So we got some windmill palm fibers, where we also managed to do a nice project on that. So that's it. So I also served as an expert in Maria Alejandra's master thesis defense in December by Zoom. She will stay as a PhD student in Bogota. So the plan now is that we can host her in the summer, fall 2021. In the meantime, Luis, the first guy, decided to leave and is not working at the university anymore. So we had to rearrange. And if she can come in the summer, fall 2021, we will continue to exchange samples and try to work this way. And then our workshop was postponed, but we will try to organize either online, some kind of final workshop, or in the fall of 2021, if we manage to do this in the fall. So just, I think that's it. I hope I manage. And I just put some nice pictures of, this is the stuff that we work with. So these fibers that you can see from the palm tree, on the right side is the palm tree and the Swiss agricultural waste that we worked with. And we made some composites. And on the left side, it's the Manicaria palm, so the Colombian palm, where they made some composites with. So we're at least exchanging a lot if we cannot really meet in person.
Excellent, very interesting and very good timekeeping on your end as well. Thank you very much. So now we will move on to our fourth presentation today from PhD student Omid Alizadeh from the University of St. Gallen, and he received a mobility grant in 2020 for his work in humanitarian studies, which he will tell us all about now.
Thank you very much, dear Rocio. So I also try to respect this 5-minute rule, or even less, I promise.
I think I scared everyone, I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you, Leticia, for sharing the screen. So hello, everyone. My name is Omid. I'm a PhD candidate at CLS here at the University of St. Gallen. My thesis is about humanitarian persuasion against xenophobia in the context of Venezuelan migrants in Colombia. So my research has as its main objective promoting pro-migrant behaviors and reducing prejudice in the context of Venezuelan migrants in Colombia. Since my research deals with human behavior and attitude formation through mediated or communicational interventions in order to measure better the pertinent variables, I have to conduct surveys. In fact, the methodological approach which guides my research is mixed method, and what I explain here is all about alternatives to on-the-field quantitative experiments or surveys. So the original idea of my research was collecting survey participants on the field, for example, through university students or specified samples and populations. But once the COVID-19 pandemic started spreading all over the world, the access to data, specifically human samples, became limited due to many reasons, such as social distancing, travel restrictions, and so on and so forth. And since in communication and behavior studies, human samples are a must, I have to adopt another strategy to be still able to fulfill the main objectives of my project. So the solution to this problem was recruiting participants online and resorting to participant recruitment tools or online panels. So here I mentioned 5 popular recruitment tools, which are called Qualtrics, SurveyMonkey, Prolific, Amazon MTurk, and Turk Prime. And if we have enough time, I will compare and contrast them all. But the main idea behind using these online platforms is that if you cannot be present on the field to collect your quantitative data, you can ask experts to do it for you. So the advantages of recruitment tools are that, are faster data collection, larger samples, reduction in costs and prices, and more diverse, this is very important, more diverse populations. However, you should notice that it is costly and additional funds are needed. I have to say that these alternatives are good for big projects because most of the academic recruitment panels do not accept or take seriously projects lower than a certain amount of money. For example, in case of Qualtrics, they do not usually accept projects lower than 1,000 euros. So this means that a certain number of participants are needed for your projects. I cannot clearly say now how much one is supposed to pay for each participant because it depends on many factors, such as demographic factors, survey location, and so on and so forth. And all these platforms update their price list yearly. So yeah, you have to just keep in touch with them. Actually, some researchers, and for some researchers, it is not considered as a disadvantage because they're rich enough and they do not consider this as a disadvantage. Having mentioned all these tools and online panels, at the end of the day, it is on the researcher to decide which panel best suits their research project. I can give you a hint. These panels are academically acknowledged and scholars usually report them in their publication and articles. So if you take a look at the literature of your field, and in particular the quantitative studies, you will definitely find the appropriate tool for your research project. Thank you.
Wow, that was also excellent timekeeping on your behalf, Omid. Thank you very much. We gained 1 minute right there. So I hope I didn't scare our participants in pressuring them to speak quickly. But thank you very much. So I will go back to Dr. Peter Varga to jumpstart our Q&A session and to inquire a bit more about the project and some of the how it was affected and how they were able to adapt to the new circumstances. So Dr. Varga, I wanted to, there you are. I don't see you, but I think you're still there.
Yes, I'm here, yes, waiting for your question.
Okay, yes. So I was wondering, it's if I understood correctly, because you could not interview the tourists who were your focus group, that is who you were intending to interview, you shifted your focus to other stakeholders, namely hotels, tour guides, and the local residents in the Galapagos. So it wasn't your plan originally to interview these stakeholders, the hotels, the tour guides, and the residents. But my more important question is perhaps when you made this shift, did your research question change? So I wanted to hear a little bit about that, and then maybe I have a follow-up question, but let's take it step by step.
Yes, certainly we had to modify a little bit the research questions as well, because it was originally about the perception of the tourists about this over-tourism phenomenon. Now, of course, we have to shift it. So what basically we would like to understand how the local stakeholders, they see the handling and the management of this pandemic on the island, and what impact this pandemic has on, for example, on the hotels or the tour guides and the local population. So we have questions, for example, about the future, how they see the future, because if you see statistics, they are not very optimistic about the future, which means that we probably not return to previous numbers as far as tourism is concerned before 2022, 23, or even 24, depends on the study we are talking about. So the local residents, they have to adapt to this new situation. And if we understand what's going on in the Galapagos Islands and what has been going on in the Galapagos Islands, the local residents, they were dependent on economically on tourism, probably around 80 or 75%. So it's a huge impact. So we try to understand this perception or perspective because they were not considered in the past. And I think if we wish to imagine a more sustainable tourism in the future, then we should not neglect the locals' view on tourism development. And I think if we can say one positive impact of the COVID, if we can talk about positive impact, is maybe that we can shift development policies and development, let's say, master plans, tourism master plans, then they will have to consider the local population's point of view, because if they are not considered, the destination is not sustainable. If we talk about the triple bottom line of perspective, of course. So yes, we had to change the research questions as well.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. And we will try to address every single one of the projects. Maybe we won't have enough time, but let's get some feedback from Elizabeth and Natalia to hear also their perspective on this project. We still cannot hear you, Elizabeth. I'm sorry. There we go.
No, that's fine. It's like that classic, oh yeah, unmute, unmute. That was really fascinating because when I was listening specifically Dr. Varga's work, you know, it got me thinking about whether how far the locals would be enabled in terms of their ability to have a say in what's going on. And it occurs to me, firstly, that the idea that more meaningful research would come about because of the pandemic, and perhaps issues that we knew needed to be researched but didn't perhaps have the ways and the means. And I find it fascinating that actually you may end up having a bigger impact on real people's lives than perhaps you would have anticipated. The other thing that occurs to me is with the change in research question or slight modification to enable this, how far are funders, the funding organization, able to be flexible, and have they also been able to change the nature of what they expect and are willing to fund? Because surely this must be much bigger than individual researchers having to change their research questions, and it comes back to what they see at the institutional level as being the appropriate kinds of research. I suppose that's perhaps Yvette, I don't know if you're able to respond to that. How willing and able was the Leading House to be able to accommodate these changes?
Yeah, this is our daily business, to attend researchers and help and shift the expenses also, because we have a budget and we have to change the budget, of course, because all the travel expenses are not spent. So how can we shift? How, in what percentage can we shift? And, you know, like, for instance, give some tasks to a master student locally, as we can't go there, etc. So yes, it absolutely needs flexibility. And of course, we wish for other funding institutions and for the State Secretariat to be as flexible as we would like to be. You know?
I'm conscious of the idea of research impact. The UK maybe is very fussy about the idea of being able to demonstrate impact and the research excellence framework, and to be referable and to have that kind of impact based on the dissemination of your work and being able to show how people are taking it up. And it occurs to me that perhaps one of the unintended consequences, maybe particularly for Dr. Varga's work, might be around the reach of the impact of that work. If it really is able to contribute to policy changes where perhaps you might have thought that was going to take a lot longer than usual. Dr. Varga, do you think you may now have the interest of policymakers? Because I know that getting research into policy is very difficult, certainly in my experience. I don't know about yours. Do you think you might have more impact now?
It all depends on, thank you very much for your question and the wonderful British accent. I always enjoyed that listening. It's very nice. I think yes, because we already had some talks about this with my research partner from Quito, from Ecuador, Dr. Andrea Munoz, and we were talking to some decision makers already concerning the Galapagos National Park, the Research Institute, the Charles Darwin Research Institute. And obviously, this is our intention that in the end, if we can collect enough data and meaningful data, definitely we would like to make some impact that the future will bring us more sustainable planning.
Thank you.
Well, so maybe now we can fit in a couple of quick questions to more the natural sciences, because I think that in the social sciences, it might be a little bit easier to adapt some methodologies and some tools. But I can imagine that it's much more difficult when you have this exchange of samples, such as Dr. Véronique Michaud explained. But maybe I would like to address my question to Professor Dr. Betty Benrey and ask, you mentioned that you hired the local representative and that you use Zoom to communicate, but did you also implement other methodologies, or did you come across new practices that you had not considered at the genesis of your project?
Well, not really, because when this happened, as many of you, we were we froze. We didn't know what we could do. We were not allowed to travel to Mexico. The students in Mexico still now, they're not allowed to go to the field. So since our project is a field project, we were a bit in a bind, not knowing how to approach it. So basically we thought, what are possibilities? And the only possibility was to hire the locals. I tried with students first, with students from Mexico, but since they were not allowed to go to the field, that didn't work. So no, I mean, as compared to other projects, we basically kept the same question and tried to do as much as we could. We realized, and I think this is very interesting and it's related to what Elizabeth was saying in her talk. I've learned personally that we don't have to be there all the time. And communication, it's very easy via Zoom. And in fact, I think that funding agencies should adopt this because it's even cheaper. You know, we don't have to go to an international meeting to present our work. We can log in and listen. So it gets some used to it, but I think we're using the resources more efficiently. Of course, the research that we do requires the fieldwork, and the students in biology, for them, it's very important to have this field experience. So this cannot be replaced. But
exactly, I'm sure that there are some things absolutely, but I think it's finding this middle ground. Perhaps Elizabeth or Natalia have also some input there.
I had just a question about if you're the idea of the researcher not being physically co-located with the research, I think is very interesting, and I'd need to think about that a little bit more. But I wonder the quality of the data that you're able to capture from the people who are physically co-located with the experimental side. Did you find that you had to think carefully about the kinds of questions? Because if you had been there, you would perhaps have had the expert knowledge to go, this is happening, da 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 da. But in asking others who are physically there when you're not, does that change the way that you gather their data?
Yes, that changed, and our questions, although basically they remain the same, we simplified a lot. So to give you an example, we work with insects, and I can, or my students can identify them when we're in the field. The person that is working for us, he cannot. So what he's doing, we implemented other methods. He's collecting for us, and eventually when we can, we'll bring them here and we can sequence them to identify them. Or through pictures, we can identify them. But the questions had to be much more simpler because of what you're mentioning. It's not the same being out there, and if something doesn't work out, especially with live organisms. Now, if the plants don't grow, I mean, you have to quickly decide what to do. And that we cannot do. So the experiment is very small, and it's really now, we can really call it a pilot experiment. We will not be able to publish anything from this, but it will give us some idea on how to run the experiment better when we can go back to the field.
Yeah, the other thing that occurred to me, usually you can rely on the quality of your research assistants. Did you find that you've had to train your deputy research, the people you drew in on the ground, to be able to help them to help you, I suppose?
Yeah, well, this student that I hired, he's been working for us for the last 3 years during the field season. So that was not a problem. It's a lot of responsibility for him, and he was a bit hesitant to take on the job because usually we are there, the postdocs are there, or myself, I'm there. And now he's in charge. But I think he's very happy with it, and he's grown a lot professionally and academically, and he's really shown, he never had to manage an Excel file with the cost and the expenses and all this, and now he's doing that. So I think in the long run for him has been a really important experience.
Excellent, that's the value added there as well. So maybe I will ask a quick question to Dr. Véronique Michaud, and we will also try to get in a question for Omid. So just bear with us, those of you that have to leave, we understand fully. But Dr. Véronique Michaud, I was also wondering about the exchange of the samples, because you had these tests, and so how easy or how difficult was that? And then maybe we try to get some feedback also again from Natalia and Elisa.
Yeah, I mean, that's one difficult point indeed, because luckily we had this Luis who could bring samples back. So, and he brought quite a few samples when he came. So that was a good start. But after that, it is difficult indeed to exchange the samples, because we have to rely on post, and post works, but it's not always, it takes time. So, I mean, and you never know also if it will be, well kept at the right temperature and everything. So it's indeed more difficult. And that's why we decided also to look at the agricultural waste from Switzerland, because we said, well, at least we gain also, we learn tools, and we gain some new knowledge. That is something that we would never have done otherwise. So it's a kind of a way to change. You have to kind of adapt your research also to look at other things. But yeah, I mean, it's a problem. We can talk, but when we start to have to exchange, and also showing, the idea was also to learn from each other by being in the lab together. And I think we all had the same problem, that it's much more difficult to try to explain, at a distance, than being and talking in front of the machine. But yeah, well, we adapt. That's
okay. It is challenging indeed. Natalia, did you have a comment or?
Yes, I wanted to ask something to Betty, even though we are in very different fields, Betty. Mm-hmm. But my husband isn't. He did his PhD on bees, and what I was thinking is, in this situation that you have, that you cannot achieve the information directly, as you were speaking with Elizabeth, is I assume that some traditional knowledge or local knowledge has arisen in this process, like the way we call the bees, and what the bees now, the insects, right? And what is their function, for example, they have. Traditional knowledge has a very good explanation of how a Milpa system can work and why, from a very different framework. And I know that is not the point of your research, but I suppose you have a lot of this information in this moment, right? Is it happening?
Yes.
To you?
Well,
are you addressing that information as well?
Yeah, we are, and actually we are learning more from the farmers than what the farmers are learning from us. And that's why we were able to do this project now. Perhaps if it had been a very basic science project, it wouldn't have been possible. But the fact that we rented this land from a local farmer, I mean, he knows exactly when the plants need to be planted, when they have to be watered. The person that is helping Raul, the student, is the brother of the farmer, who's himself a farmer as well. So I'm sure that many things on this project are running better than if it was me and my students doing them, because they have this knowledge. And they also understand, you know, sometimes it's difficult to explain to farmers, we as scientists, we don't have those tools many times. We lack the tools to explain to the farmers why we're doing what we're doing. But actually they know, because this is their growing system. They have their milpas there. We're just, you know, exploiting this idea to do some manipulations and to do some experiments. So yes, it has been a very interesting experience, and I'm sure that we could implement some of the things that Raúl is learning and that we are learning.
Right, thank you.
Very interesting indeed how it ended up being a much richer project than what you originally expected. And the same goes to some of the comments from Dr. Véronique Michaud. So for time purposes, I will ask a question to Omid, and then maybe we can come back and start wrapping it all up, and perhaps Elizabeth, Dr. Hidson has some comments that can be a little bit more generalized to all of the different projects. Omid, you put on the table something that's a very important topic of knowing what tools are available and how to really maximize what is already there. I mean, we don't have to invent the wheel. There is so much at our disposal, and I think that the extreme of the situation has forced us to be very proactive in this search for different possibilities. And it sounds like you were very much taking advantage of that. So I really appreciated your comment. Matthias, we had a particular question for you, Omid?
Yes, I have a, thank you, Omid, for your presentation. I have just, perhaps you can tell something more about these services like Drug Prime and SurveyMonkey and Prolific. It seems like you are basically outsourcing your field work. I mean, it's the way and how they do the field work. And because I think it's a interesting topic, but I'm wondering about how they do interviews, or it's just a survey, a quantitative thing. Thank you very much.
Very interesting question. Actually, as I just mentioned, they're expert in quantitative studies. So it's not all about qualitative studies. And Dr. Elizabeth just mentioned a very, very interesting point. She just said that, she just asked this question that, do you have to teach your representatives on the ground how to help you? Do you have to help them to help you? So in this case, because you're asking experts and you're paying them, they're so they know what they're doing, and you can personalize and filter the demographic data and specify exactly from which region, what country, and what you want, and they will gather the collected data according to your actually specifications. And in terms of these panels, recruitment panels that I just mentioned, Qualtrics and, in my opinion, actually, Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey, I mean, from field to field, it changes. So you have to just check which panel is appropriate for your field. But for example, in my field communication, Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey are primarily survey software companies. So they are experts, and they have been doing this since 2005. But I said, I mean, just you have to pay them because they are working for you. Actually, you just specify all the details and elements, factors, whatever, and according to your specifications, they will find your target population.
Thank you.
Really, thank you very much. I think it's a bit of a shame that we're slightly running out of time now when the conversation is really becoming so engaging and stimulating. But perhaps we can hear some key takeaways from Elizabeth and Natalia that kind of, to start wrapping everything up.
Sure. One thing that I'm hearing all the way through is how the language of research is changing. I'm used to research being slow and measured and thoughtful, and you've done your literature review and you've done your methodology, and then you launch into this long process at the end of which you will have really good quality knowledge. But I'm hearing fast, I'm hearing rapid, I'm hearing pivot, I'm hearing change. And I suppose a question, generally, is research changing? Are we having to change as a community now? Must we make this permanent? Secondly, I'm hearing about things that we would usually have taken for granted, the ability to do X, Y, or Z, to have a workshop, suddenly being restricted, stopping, maybe moving to online at some point. And again, do we need to look at being able to move much more quickly so that the impetus of our research is not lost? Dr. Michaud, just, you were saying you hopefully were going to get the workshops, and I'm thinking they're so important, find a way to get that out there so that the quality is not lost, the impetus, the momentum is not lost. Another thing that strikes me just as a thought, ethics committees. I just battled through 3 months of ethics committees because I have video in my research. And I wonder whether our institutions also need to be more flexible and change. Are we, as researchers, a little bit old in our ways, stuffy, fuddy-duddy, not being fast? Like this whole thing about, are we fast enough? Are we responsive enough? What kind of research community are we creating suddenly occurs to me. Sharing the knowledge, my goodness, I'm so humbled by everything I've heard, the sheer amount of knowledge and expertise from actually just having to go with the flow here. Omid, I think you probably need to write up this paper on that. I will say that having experienced some stuff in the gig economy, sometimes I worry about quality. I got somebody to do transcription for me when I was really running out of time for transcription, and the quality was so poor that I had to throw it away and start from scratch. So I'd love to know about your approach. So I suppose the thing is, to wrap that up, I'm humbled by the expertise and the experience and the learning that you have all encountered and developed so quickly. And I think it's wonderful that you're sharing it in this way. And I would say, try and find other ways to get this out there. Perhaps the Leading House needs to do some research on the research that has happened in this time, because I don't think it should be lost. These are pearls of wisdom that everybody needs to be able to access for the future. There's a thing in education, policy amnesia, where we forget what we knew. Let's not forget what we have found out in this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think I agree with everything that you have said, and you have pointed out the principal challenges, and also opportunities that we have right now. The only thing I would like to also point out here is that we are, almost all of you are relying on the communities or the organizations, right? Because you cannot be there. And that is a huge opportunity to make social impact through our research in different ways that you're already achieving, the training processes that you are doing, and the learning, as Dr. Betty has just said, that you are also having from the point of view of the local agents is very valuable. And I think that is the greatest opportunity that we are having right now as researchers, no matter if you are in the biological or the social sciences. And the principal challenge that we have, though, is that we need to share power in our research. And I believe we need to learn from that and also systematize that learning that we're having. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to everyone. Those are inspirational words that we cannot beat. So we will leave it there. Thank you very much again to Professor Dr. Betty Benrey for sharing her project and experience, as well as Dr. Peter Varga, Dr. Véronique Michaud, future Dr. Omid Alizadeh, and above all to Dr. Elizabeth Hidson and Natalia Reinoso for being here and giving us so many insightful points to embark on in our journey of research. Thank you very much, everyone, again, for participating in the second workshop on remote field.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.